It's always really interesting when you get to see a movie that you realize is the Rosetta Stone for tons of other movies you've seen your whole life. Quatermass in the Pit is absolutely one of those movies.
Yeah, there's an interesting look at things. It's like you're looking at the vintage version of toys you used to play with. You're like, wow, this is where that came from. But, it's nevertheless enjoyable. It is, it's almost like finding a really cool collector's item.
Yeah, and that's even a bigger bonus when that movie happens to include a giant alien ghost demon head floating over the city of London. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Dietsch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And we're continuing our theme month of Hammer My Heart, our exploration of the Hammer horror movie library with Quatermass and the Pit, which is a pretty much just straight up sci-fi. I mean, you could say Frankenstein, because Frankenstein's a science fiction story of sorts, but Quatermass and the Pit we're talking aliens this week.
Yep.
This is the third film in a series of Quatermass films by Hammer. The character Quatermass was created by Nigel Neal, who also wrote the screenplay for this film. I did watch the first two Quatermass movies. I won't talk too much about them, especially because this third one was the first one that was in color. They recast the actor who played Quatermass in the first two films. I believe it was Brian Dunleavy who played him in the first two. I may be wrong about that.
Yeah, Brian Dunleavy. And this is a character that I think most Americans probably won't be familiar with, but a lot of Brits of a certain age will be, because there's this whole series of Quatermass TV episode, like TV series that started in the early 50s. And then they started making Quatermass movies that were based on this TV series in the late 50s and throughout the 60s. Like this came out in 67, and it was released in the US as something called 5 Million Years to Earth.
Yes, each of the Quatermass movies got retitled over in the US. Quatermass, the character Bernard Quatermass, and the stories that he often found himself involved with have been seen to be extremely influential on stuff like Doctor Who in British science fiction, and we're certainly going to talk about a lot of influences with this. But Quatermass in the Pit is a really interesting premise because it kicks off with, well, first of all, it kicks off with a dope title sequence, we should say.
Oh yeah, the title sequence is it's kind of a Saul Bass Light thing, and one of the most incredible things about it is the title treatment, like the way the title is actually illustrated and drawn out is like, ooh, that's really beautiful. Whoever did that did a great job with it. It's a good mood setter and is very indicative of the time which was made. That late 60s kind of mod fashion. There are quite a few cast members in the film, and Quatermass himself is one of the older cast members in this. He's quite kind of grizzled and gray, but there are some younger cast members like Barbara Shelley, for instance, who plays Barbara Judd in the movie. She's very fashionable, very late 60s, very mod. It's very, very cool look that has actually aged pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good casting. Julian Glover is Colonel Breen, which of course we love the last name Breen, but most people will probably know Julian Glover from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He plays the villain Donovan in that. In this, he's the stuck-up, rigid kind of foil to Quatermass, the man of science, and this is a military man who won't listen to any of Quatermass's ridiculous theories about what's going on. Andrew Keir plays Professor Bernard Quatermass, and this definitely tracks with the other Quatermass movies I watched in the sense that the creator of it, Nigel Neal, who wrote the screenplay, does not seem to be very interested in a lot of typical movie or popular fiction trappings. Like, for example, Barbara Shelley, who is very good in the movie, there's, I think, the slightest hint of an attraction when her and Quatermass meet, and nothing comes of it.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of doing things that are kind of expected. Like audiences expect to see a little bit of that, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And this is something you realize early on is like, oh, the character work in this movie is very light to like almost non-existent.
Oh, I mean, we say this all the time on this show. Put this on the bingo card, the GenreVision bingo card. this is a plot movie.
Yes, this movie is about things that happen and a list of events. It is not really about the characters and what they want and what they stand for and how they're feeling. There's a bit of that, but it is really not the primary focus of the film.
To the degree, I will say that it's there, but there is not a strong emotional basis for it. This is a philosopher's approach to writing genre fiction.
Yeah, it is a beard stroker, a head scratcher. It presents some really interesting and heady ideas, which is what I think makes the film most notable. You know, I've heard interviews and commentaries with Ridley Scott where he has quoted Quatermass in the Pit several times, talking about his science fiction influences and the influences on the Alien series. You know, this is a really influential film particularly for Brits of a certain age.
Oh, I mean, to the point where we were listing off influences that we saw as far as like Alan Moore and Watchmen, the alien squid that's in this, and what goes down when we'll get to the finale is like, there is no question he was drawing upon Quatermass in the Pit for that. There's a dissection scene later that immediately made me think of Wilford Brimley in The Thing, when he's dissecting the Thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much of this movie that we have seen in other movies growing up and you know, just throughout our lives. It reminds me of, I can't remember the name of it, and it's so terrible, but it was a movie that former co-host and I, Nick Murray, did. And it was the movie that showed for the first time a woman hiking up her dress and sticking her leg out on the road to catch a ride.
It happened one night.
And that was like such a revelatory movie for me. I'm like, that's a thing I've seen in countless cartoons and parodies, and just figured that it was just some cultural joke. But this is the Rosetta Stone. This is the genesis of that as an idea in pop culture. And that's what so much of Quatermass in the Pit is to me.
Right. It's what molded all of those other moments.
Right.
So that's really what makes it most notable. The cool thing is like the quality of the filmmaking is pretty apparent early on. The movie opens with this really strong, long take where we're following, I believe it's a police officer around in the exterior outside this subway station in, what's the place called? Hobbs End?
Hobbs End, because Hobbs End is the name of the town in John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. So, you know, it was just like this, wow, there's so much of this movie in countless other movies that we've seen. But yeah, that opening shot, which you said even has kind of a touch of evil feel to it with this gliding camera following this person. You know, I'll say this, the movie kicks off. It wastes no time getting to the idea that it wants to explore.
Yes. So we go down the stairs into this subway station, and there is some sort of excavation, some sort of construction project happening. And they're digging through all this sort of clay and wet dirt, and they find skulls and other bones. But the skulls are really the most notable because they're really oddly shaped. You know, definitely kind of an ape-like missing link sort of Cro-Magnon shape with a really big pronounced forehead. And from there, this kicks off a series of, events where scientists come down and investigate. So this also reminded me of what they did with the Super Mario Brothers movie, where Daisy is a scientist digging near the New York subways to find dinosaur bones, fossils. And it's like, okay, all right, I see where some of these ideas took root in this flick. So not only did they find skeletons, the most important find is this, what appears to be at least a metal cylinder at first, but it gets stranger from there.
Yes, and I will say, especially for 1967, this has to be an incredibly strange amalgamation of sci-fi ideas. This movie is weird. Maybe not as weird as it would have been back then, because we've seen so many other stories take influence from this, but it's still very weird in that there is this strange metal tube that seems to be stuck in this clay wall around all of these bizarre prehistoric humanoid skulls. And this is a very large metal object, which eventually appears to be some kind of ship.
Yeah, it's some kind of vessel. It's roughly kind of spaceship shaped, although they do a fairly good job of making the design of it kind of ambiguous. It's like, what what the hell am I really looking at here?
It looks genuinely alien. Like it's weirdly asymmetrical and like there's just weird loops and divots and stuff. That's like the design on it and the budget that we see in this movie is undoubtedly impressive.
Right. It doesn't necessarily look like something that is designed to fly. It is something that really is confusing and kind of confounding to look at. You know, it's, again, reminding me of Alien and the crescent-shaped ship from that first movie. You're like, that doesn't look aerodynamic. That doesn't look designed to fly. That is something really strange.
It's alien. Like it looks not of this earth. And that is a successful part of this movie. And even more so as we get into other facets of it. But so this dig gets happening and Bernard Quatermass, he has some kind of job within the government, some kind of scientific research job. And
well, let me question you on this one, because I didn't see the two previous films in this series, you know, the series with kind of loose continuity, but like, is his job, you know, as consulting with the government, is that more strongly established in the prior two films, or
it's more so in the other ones where he's part of some particular project like that is being funded by the government, and then the events that happen are part, like in the first one, the events that take place are directly linked to the project that he was a part of.
Right. So there doesn't appear to be any sort of really, really strong canon that links these films together. This is, you know,
no,
this doesn't take canon so seriously like we see in movies today. These same stories were just made as BBC series is like 8-10 years ago. So this is like a really quick remake turnaround, basically.
Well, and it's also, you know, there just wasn't the archival access to stuff like that. It's like maybe it aired one time and that was it. Like, I didn't replay it or anything. Like,
yeah, elements are lost, or, you know, they were never recovered from fires or something like that. So this was a product that they could actually market internationally and get Quatermass out to more countries instead of it being such a British product. But it is a really inescapably British story. It's a little stuffy. It's a little stiff upper lip because Quatermass is just this old English guy in this, you know, tweed suit. Very, very, very professorial.
I would say this one and the second Quatermass movie are the most kind of stuffy and British. There's still, you know, good stuff going on in both of these, but I was very surprised considering, and maybe we spoiled ourselves by doing Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula first, because, you know, there's a bad stereotyping bias where you go into older movies and you're like, it's going to be slow and it's going to be stagey and boring and all this stuff. And I did not have that issue at all with Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula. But Quatermass in the Pit is the first one of these that we've done. Like, this is aggressively British.
Right. Well, this isn't set in like Gothic, you know, drawing rooms and things like that. You know, even though Dracula and Frankenstein, the last two movies that we've done, do take a fairly like low budget approach where it's like, yeah, this scene takes place in a corridor, but it's a ye olde Gothic corridor. In this one, it's just like, yeah, this takes place in like a subway station in some part of London, you know, or this takes place in some dude's office. You know, it's very mundane, and in that way, it just remains very, very British. And the fact that so much of it takes place in the London Metro, in the underground, it just very, very culturally rooting. I feel it's such an English story.
Yeah, well, and there's so much subtext and stuff that's going on in this that's so directly about England and Britain and everything, because there's all this talk about, you know, they think this thing might be something that was placed here by the Germans in the last war, and there's all these kind of very topical post-war paranoias going on.
Yeah, they think that initially that it might be unexploded ordnance from German bombings.
Right.
And there's all this sort of lingering post-war anxiety where, you know, the first method that they use to keep people out of that particular underground station is they put a sign outside that says, like, we found unexploded German bombs in here. And that's what initially makes it up to the newspapers, is, you know, they think they're excavating some sort of you know, fallen ordnance. The story gets a little bit stranger from there because the scientists and, you know, the scientists are really the only ones who are really in search of the truth. Like the military men led by Breen, they're all really led to believe that, yeah, it's some kind of bomb, and yeah, the Germans are responsible, like the most rational explanation possible. But that changes when they go across the street to like these like abandoned apartment buildings that evidently freak people out supernaturally.
There's so much about this movie that is actually really interesting to talk about. And one of the things that I do like is this, idea of post-war paranoia, and that this is kind of a cynical movie taking down the idea of British exceptionalism in the post-war.
Sure. Well, this is a country that had its ass kicked in World War II.
Right.
This is a country sort of in repair. This was an empire that had been knocked back. And I think that's culturally, important to remember, that there is, the British sense of prestige, I think, was under reconstruction at this time.
And so I like that there is this through line of the military having, the military figure kind of representing that arm of the government, posturing that he's got all the answers and he knows everything and everything's going to be fine and they've got everything under control, when demonstrably that's not true. I like that.
Yes. And this is also one of the things that kind of portends like what's going to happen in the third act.
Oh, good Lord, does it.
And it's like, well, this is the classic sort of disaster movie role where it's like, oh, this is the government guy who doesn't believe any of the scientists.
Walter Peck. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I want to, because another idea that I absolutely love in this movie, and I'm actually it's one of my main criticisms about it, is that they talk about this area, Hobbs End, this fictional place, and they say like, yeah, Hobbs End, it used to be spelled with one B, but because that was considered another name for the devil.
Right. HOB''S, like the devil's end. Yeah.
And there's these buildings, that people don't like. Like there's this one cop who, good Lord, is sweating an ocean.
Yeah. Well, they made a point of that because the other characters sweat similarly later on in the movie when they're being affected by the same powers. But
yes,
he says that he had grown up near this abandoned set of apartment buildings near this, supposedly alien wreck. And people there had expressed that there were supernatural goings on, that they had seen demons and poltergeists and ghosts, and there's all sorts of claw marks on the walls. It's pretty freaky, and it's a good set.
Well, so it's this idea. It's like, ooh, maybe like, are there alien ghosts going around? That sounds pretty cool. But I love that they have a succession of scenes where it keeps going further and further back in time.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have some ye olde giant book that's written in Latin that some guy's got to put his finger to and trace while he's reading it. And they're talking about like, did thou see a form of a goblin? That idea is so awesome to me, but we never see it in the movie.
So immediately, like the movie I wanted to see out of this was like, oh, were aliens responsible for demon and devil sightings in ye olde Britain? Like that immediately,
right.
That's the kind of period piece that I would want to see today. I think approaching it in this sort of like science fiction, very modern for the time, very modern science fiction disaster film that eventually breaks out. It's like, okay, I understand why they took that route, because it's really ripe for commentary on societal systems and government. And
my issue with that particular idea is that those moments happen in the movie and we never see it. It's all characters going like, oh, I saw this thing and it was scary. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, show me that. Please show me that, because that sounds awesome.
Yeah, there is something in this film where I feel like it's consistently not able to deliver upon the kind of fear that the characters are feeling, where every attempt it tries to be like, oh my gosh, I saw this thing and it scared the bejesus out of me. It's like, well, you can show me that. Eventually, like later on in the movie, there is like a giant demon head in this guy that's pretty bitchin'. But
you gotta get right to that. Yeah, the best fucking thing in the movie.
Early on in the movie, it's like, well, what are these people seeing that is scaring them so bad? Well, eventually they find these dead Martians in this spaceship. And they just basically look like big grasshoppers with stumpy antennae. They're nothing special.
Yeah, they're big locusts.
Yeah.
I adore them as somebody who loves old-timey monster prop design stuff. And I really like how weird, because they continue to try and like get into the ship. And they can't get into it. There's factors of this that are never explained. Like there's this odd like ringed Venn diagram design on this ship that's like, what was that?
Yeah, they never explain why they scratched it in, but they talk about its origins and that it's like an ancient magical symbol. It's like, oh,
right,
this is something that was scratched upon here by some older society because they thought this was magical.
Or yeah, or I mean, or that is the origin of that symbol.
Mhm.
Like that's where it came from, that somebody saw that and went mad and decided to adopt it as a magical symbol. Because they make a point of like, they get this drill, this blue collar guy comes in and, I guess he's just the drillman, and they can't make a dent in this thing. But then they come back to it and it looks like the opening started to melt somewhat.
Right. And then they don't explain why, but for some reason there is a hole where there is sort of a melt mark and dripping, and suddenly the whole panel melts away to reveal this crypt, this sort of like crystalline crypt for all these dead Martians.
Super cool. Like, I love it. Again, especially for 1967, it feels weird. Like it's a weird idea and a weird visual concept.
It does. It was actually reminded a bit of Life Force.
Yeah.
The Tobe Hooper film.
Go listen to our Life Force episode. And yes, they are just little like big plasticky cockroach looking things, but man, it's really fun when they pull them out and then they're like, as soon as they're exposed to our atmosphere, they've started to disintegrate. So we get all this wonderful goopy monster stuff.
Oh yeah, lots of goopy dissections and putting stuff in jars. I'm sure it was very gross for the time.
It's very cool. But then the bigger thing that seems to be going on here is like, there seems to be, and I think you understood this better than I did, because I kind of got lost in the bigger story of what was going on, and that these aliens were basically coming here and trying to change the DNA of human beings. And that's why they found those weird Cro-Magnon skulls. They were experiments, essentially.
Right. So the implication is that the Martians were visiting Earth on a fairly regular basis, and because there was potential anxiety. This is all, by the way, just deductions on the part of Quatermass. This is not proven. This is just him like riffing.
Travis said that his superpower is making the most insane conclusions ever. It's true.
Yeah, his insane powers of deduction, just jumping to conclusions all the time. But what Quatermass deduces is that Mars was failing as a planet due to, climate change, and they do mention climate change on Earth in this film. They said that they were using modified humans and trying to advance evolution so that they could colonize Earth better. That they kind of managed to predict that humans would fuck up Earth's atmosphere and manage to turn it into another Mars for them.
Well, there's another layer. There's so many layers to this, which on paper I really like, because it makes it weird and unique and dense in cool ways. I don't know if it's necessarily executed the best in terms of getting all of this across, but it turns out that the projections of these aliens and their spirits or something are the explanation for certain kind of extrasensory perception abilities, telekinesis and stuff like that.
Right. Evidently the modifications that the Martians made to the human genome were more than just like, making us smarter. Actually, they gave us other senses. And these other senses have been passed down through certain genetic lineages. Like certain people can see visions of the Martians. Other people will never. One of the people in the movie who feels it most strongly is Barbara Judd, played by Barbara Steele. And there is this
Barbara Shelley.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Barbara Shelley. But there's this interesting scene where they have this very this very silly gadget that they can put on somebody's head, and the images that someone is seeing in their head will be transmitted to like a TV. Total bullshit gadget. I would love to see something like it today.
It's a little Cerebro, another influence there.
Yeah, exactly, Cerebro. So what they did,
y'all catch that?
Cerebro. They send her into the ship, and she starts to have a vision of this Martian history. And she has this full-on freak out while she's wearing the Cerebro helmet, and all of it gets transmitted to a TV and recorded.
Well, and this is another layer to the story. It's not just that the Martians were colonizing Earth; it's that there was a racial genocide on Mars as well, where some of the aliens killed the others.
Yes, they kind of breeze past that, and we see footage of that in this stuff that they're able to pull out of Judd's head. And they showed this to all of the military men who haven't believed a single word of it so far. And somehow this is what manages to convince them. Although by today's standards, the effects in that are not at all convincing.
No, they're very adorable. I actually really love them. But this is another I mean, if you're having a British story and talking about colonization, like that's so loaded
Very.
and in a big way.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel that is a conscious piece of commentary on the movie's mind, talking about Britain's history as colonizers and what that meant to the societies and the peoples that they did that to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's almost a sense of violation from the characters.
Well, I mean, all of this stuff leads up to what you rightly called as potentially the best line in the movie, in which Barbara Judd, realizing that humankind has been manipulated genetically by these aliens, she says, "We are the Martians."
Yes, we're the Martians now. That is, I think, like a good centerpiece for the movie that like the rest of the movie is built out upon. Like there's kind of a mindfuck aspect to that was probably a lot more revelatory back when it first came out, because this would have been at the time like revolutionary science fiction.
I mean, and again, thematically, it's like all this stuff about the Martians having racial genocides and colonizing another place and, taking advantage and exploiting its people for its own means. Saying we are the Martians now is like, we did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, props to it. Like all of this stuff that we're talking about, this is the best stuff in the movie as far as intellectually, but the movie's actually kind of boring.
Yeah. For the most part, I would say for 2/3 of this movie, nothing's really popping off. It's people in, largely uninteresting sets. There are lots of conversations about interesting ideas, but the movie itself is not really going in interesting places and doing interesting things. It is very stiff upper lip. Like you said, it does get kind of boring. It's not a slog. I'll say that. It's not a slog.
No, I will say that it is, while it is boring, it's boring in a way like I can read an interesting dissertation or a piece of, armchair philosophy and find it interesting, but by its very nature, it's kind of boring.
Yes.
And I feel that same way about Quatermass, but editing wise, pacing wise, plotting wise, the movie is not dragging you down.
It's a very different kind of Hammer film. This is about 10 years after what we first started talking about with the Hammer Dracula and the Hammer Frankenstein. This is a different era of Hammer filmmaking. Instead of setting these in sort of like parlors, this is trying to approach more of what a Hollywood film would be like, and that it eventually, it's really big. The guy who directed this movie also directed a movie called A Night to Remember that came out in 1958. The director is Roy Ward Baker, and if you don't know what A Night to Remember is like a really big Titanic film.
Yep.
So it was a really big disaster film. Something on the scale for the time like Poseidon Adventure. And so he was brought on specifically so that he could handle the third act of this film, because the third act of Quatermass in the Pit, it pops off, baby.
In a way that really pulled the rug out from Travis and I.
Yeah, we did not expect this movie to go to this place.
We've certainly said this on the show before. This is kind of a more classical approach to cinematic storytelling, in that it's not nowadays where it's like, all right, every 15 minutes or something, you need to have a big action or set piece beat or something. This is more in the classical mold where it's like, we're building up to that third act. We're setting all the dominoes up. And trust me, when they fall, they're going to fall hard. And I got to give Quatermass in the Pit that third act falls hard.
Well, and it's quite a surprise, because there's a lot of this movie where you're wondering, I'm not quite sure what they're leading up to. I'm not quite sure what the larger stakes are. And they're hinting at like, well, we don't want people to find out about this thing because we're worried it could trigger some sort of mass reaction due to this sort of certain genetic markers in people that, if they gain some sort of awareness of this artifact, this Martian artifact in this subway station, they're going to have some sort of mass freak out.
Well, we get to see that when I think they're trying to drill into it and these vibrations happen. And Julian Glover is just making the face of all faces.
Oh man, he is gurning hard. It is so good.
It's wonderful. That kind of overacting, which is good. Like it serves this well, this idea that there's some kind of force in here that has a psychic hold over certain people. And eventually where it goes is that the psychic hold is literally possessing people in the end.
Right. So what happens when the government really fucks us up? Because of course, is they let all these media people down in the subway station to see this alien craft or whatever it is. Crypt could be, I don't know. And when they broadcast these images out, people lose their fucking minds. And suddenly, this very stuffy science fiction film becomes a disaster film. And it's a pretty stunning one. I mean, it's not absolutely huge and enormous, but it's like, yeah, there are miniatures. There's lots of big fire. There's like erupting, water mains spraying water everywhere.
Buildings are crumbling left and right.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, again, for them talking about all of this post-war stuff and potentially undetonated German bombs and stuff, it all of a sudden, I have to imagine that it conjured up images of the Blitz.
Absolutely. It looks downright apocalyptic. And it would have been something like, at the end of Man of Steel, reminding everybody of 9/11.
Right, exactly.
Now, I mean, keep in mind, this was more than 20 years after World War II had ended. But, seeing the military criticized so heavily in this, and like Julian Glover's character at this point has been roasted to a crisp by the energy that this space object, whatever it is putting off. Like that is wonderful. Honestly, he gets the best character arc in the movie because he has this poetic ending to his arc where he stands in front of the ship not believing it's going to do anything to him, and yet it fucking melts him like a marshmallow at a bonfire.
And again, to give credit to this movie, technically the editing is perfect because Breen and the other scientist who we haven't really talked about, who's the one who's kind of researching these skulls and everything, and he's very much about ancient man and stuff. His name's Roney, Dr. Roney, played by James Donald.
Yes,
they're in a bar, and Quatermass has begun to come under the influence of the alien psychic force or whatever, and he's having to fight to keep himself back. And there's a great close up on him, and when he's coming back to himself, and he says the name Breen, and right when he says Breen, cut to this awesome, I don't know if it was totally a puppet or Julian Glover in makeup.
It's Julian Glover in makeup.
Just this fried ass, smoking husk of a man.
I mean, his eyes are like burned out of his head. It's really gross. Very shocking.
I mean, like you said, it's like that's the shot that earned the movie an X certificate.
Yeah.
It is that shocking, not just in the construction of the actual effect, but how the movie hits you with it at the perfect moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolute great cut, fantastic close up, and good makeup. It's all the things that make that moment great working together. This is where I started to really be surprised by this movie. This movie really pulled an apocalypse out of its back pocket and said, "Aha, motherfuckers!" in a way that reminded me of Edgar Wright's The World's End.
That's another one. I mean, at the end of The World's End, we have characters looking up at a giant spectral force above them. And good Lord, good, sweet movie Jesus, does this movie deliver a giant ghost alien locust in the middle of London, towering over everyone, inflicting psychic damage upon them as the world crumbles around. It is so great and so amazing. I absolutely loved this from a science fiction genre approach. And the execution of it too, like, yes, this weird... The whole deal with the Martians is that they have these two little horns, so they look like a devil, and that's why it's like, oh, then the ghosts and spirits and projections that people have seen, maybe that is where our cultural consciousness idea of the devil came from.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing that writ large looming over London as this towering menace, it's awesome. Like it is, and I mean that in the literal sense of the term, like awestruck by how wild that idea is.
Yeah, it is. It actually reminded me of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man at the end of Ghostbusters. It is an interesting way to think of that same idea of choose the form of the Destructor. That as such a powerful symbol, the devil's head towering above London. And it's done with some really great effects. I really love the way that they realized that. It
looks great. I think, I mean, and that's not just like, oh, it looks great for the time. Like, no, it looked great when we watched it yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way they logic themselves out of it is one of those, it's bad screenwriting in my opinion, in which all of a sudden a character is just like, oh, wait a minute, this thing will work. And we've had no kind of setup to it. And it's the character of Dr. Roney saying like, well, iron was the devil's metal, the thing that would ward him off. And, was iron's very attached to a lot of historical.
The superpower of leaping to conclusions.
Exactly. And there's no setup or anything for you. It's just like, well, iron would work. So I'm going to climb up on this big iron crane and ram it into that ghost alien. And it's like, okay, I'll watch that.
Sure, pal.
And it's great.
It looks really impressive. That explosion is like, damn. And I really wished in this moment, with Dr. Roney making this big sacrifice and blowing himself up to eliminate the giant Martian ghost head. Show me what you got. I wish that they had actually made Dr. Roney more of a character. He's in the movie a lot and he says a lot of things, but can I tell you who he really is?
I just know he likes skulls. That's like
Sure.
his big character. He likes these skulls and he really wants, there's a very baseline kind of like scientists versus the government thing that is clearly that is a thing in the other Quatermass movies where it's like, you got to listen to the scientists. Like the scientists know what's up if we would just listen to them, but the government keeps being the government.
Topical.
That is all good and well, but there is no deeper personal stakes. And I'm not saying that all movies have to have that, but this movie could have, like, if there was going to be, it didn't need to be a romance. I'm not saying that's the only way to solve this problem. But if it was that there was some kind of romantic feelings between Dr. Roney and Barbara Shelley's character, Barbara Judd. Like, and so it's like, okay, when he sacrifices himself, it's extra sad because they liked each other. Like
right.
that's like a 101, very simple, not the most interesting thing to do, but it's something.
Right. Or there would have been some history implied between the two of them, something there. They do get a scene together in the sort of wrecked pub that again brought me right back to The World's End. There it's like they had a moment here that they could have used for better character building, I think. And instead they spend time talking about like, oh my God, the aliens. It is a thing that is happening. It's like, you're talking about the plot. Let's talk about you for a minute here.
Exactly. I mean, I think coming around to, I don't want it to be, because I love that the movie ends immediately when the giant ghost alien is destroyed. And it's just, there is looping footage of Quatermass and Judd standing near some rubble, like kind of looking around and looking at each other. And then it fades and the same footage loops again while the credits roll. I adored that.
Yeah, it's cute.
But like this third act is incredibly powerful from a filmmaking standpoint, from a genre standpoint. I think it rules. Like it's super cool. But yeah, I have to agree with your criticism about there's not a strong sense of emotionality to any of the characters. There's a great and clearly intentional sense of the intellectual and the philosophical issues going on. And that's mostly what we've talked about in the movie. But it's a movie that needs a heart.
Yeah, and honestly, it could have used a chase scene. It could have used something else, a way to take the conflict and make it a little bit more cinematic. One of the things they did in adapting this from the original miniseries, which had aired on BBC some 10 years before, is like the end of the BBC miniseries is they throw a metal chain into the pit. And it's like, well, that's very small and dinky. And this one, it's like, well, let's take the huge fucking crane and ram it into the alien head. And I'm like, yeah,
we'll get the biggest metal chain we can find.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies, and I can see why it's very revered in a lot of science fiction, classic science fiction circles, is because this is an all brain movie.
Yeah.
Like it's an extremely brainy movie. And granted, there are really good things about that. And a lot of it, what we talked about, but there is a very severe lack of an emotional core to the movie outside of its genuinely fascinating and kind of stimulating ideas. It's genre ideas, it's philosophies, it's all of that stuff is, I'm sure it's part of the reason why the movie has remained so talked about and so influential over the years. But actually watching it as a movie experience, it's like, man, I wish I cared about these things happen to these characters more.
Yes. And so to kind of, bring this into perspective, The Curse of Frankenstein, which was released 10 years prior, the budget for that was like some £65,000. The budget for this was £275,000. A much bigger budget.
Yeah, it's like what, like 5 times that budget almost?
It's a lot. It's a lot of fucking money. And so they spent it all in the climax of this film, and also to build some really amazing effects and props throughout.
Great sets. You talked about, it's like, oh, it's a lot of people and like boring sets. It's like, you're not wrong, but that entire London Underground, like dugout London Underground set that they have, it's huge. Like it's absolutely massive. It's very impressive.
It's a little brightly for my taste, but like they had to have, like people actually spreading clay on the walls of that set, like I don't know, inches and inches deep of clay to make sure that the scenes where they're digging out bones and stuff like that were real. It's quite impressive when it wants to be. And again, there's certain things like certain long takes in the movie that are actually very tense. There's some really good sound design in the film.
Yeah, the movie's spooky. Like you said, the movie, when it wants to be spooky, is effective at being so.
It's also a movie that I think is an opportunity for people who are pedantic about effects to be pedantic about effects. Like,
Sure.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of props flying around like Poltergeist. But if you look closely, you can see the monofilament and the wires holding them up. It's like, well, yeah, any pedant can see those.
Sure. I mean, it's the buy-in when they open up that crypt and see those giant space locusts. It's like, we all know what we're looking at here, but it's okay because it's fun, and I liked it.
I would recommend this to sci-fi geeks. Like if you like Doctor Who and if you like all the things that implies, and if you like the sort of slightly brainier science fiction that was coming out of Britain at the time, this is something you should absolutely see. It's also something that you may have some interest in if you're interested in what has influenced the science fiction classics of today and also, decades past. This was an incredibly influential film.
That would be my main takeaway from this. Is I will actually go farther and say I would call Quatermass in the Pit a necessary watch, not because I think it's an amazing film. I think it's a good film, but I think it's a necessary watch because you will see 20, 30 other stories in film and television and other forms of fiction. Their family tree has, branches that go back to Quatermass in the Pit. There's just so much that this movie seeded in the realm of science fiction that it is impossible not to recognize its importance in the genre. I mean, it's as far as our Hammer My Heart month goes, yeah, it's been my least favorite of what we've watched, but it's still good. I still would say it's a good movie.
It was also considered a big success for director Roy Ward Baker, who would go on to make a Dracula sequel. He made Scars of Dracula. He also directed the movie that we're doing next week, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
And we'll talk about that next week. But first, we have to head over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we want to encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com, comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick, and we will read it on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Quatermass and the Pit?
My shelf pick for this week, I think, is a better film, a film I would not hesitate to call a classic, and it's the 1953 War of the Worlds, which we did on our last Alien Invasion month. This is directed by a guy named Byron Haskin and produced, of course, by George Pal. This movie is a stone cold classic, and it has some incredible scale and effects throughout and finds really interesting ways to dramatize its conflict. There's a lot of action. It has an ending that I don't really like. It kind of falls really, really flat. So it's the exact opposite issue with Quatermass in the Pit, where it's like a humdrum movie throughout, and then the ending rocks with Quatermass. This is the opposite. It's like, this is a really kick-ass movie, but the ending is like, it really deflates.
Yeah, definitely go listen to our episode on that. Well, for my pick, I wanted to do another classic sci-fi movie that I think has been incredibly influential. And I mentioned the dissection scene of the Martians reminding me of Wilford Brimley dissecting the Thing in The Thing. So I wanted to go back to the original The Thing from Another World. This is the Howard Hawks movie starring James Arness as the monster. I mean, there are certain movies that I feel are such cornerstones of a genre that, again, you need to see them.
Yes.
Like if you want to have a good education and basis for so much. Like The Thing from Another World is not anywhere near one of my favorite movies, but it's not a bad movie, and it's an exceptionally influential one. One that I think continues to influence people without maybe even knowing it. And it's not bad. Like, it's not a bad movie. There's some really cool shots in it.
It's a creature feature classic for sure. Is it as much of a creature feature classic as John Carpenter's remake? No. But it's definitely worth a watch if you like movies like this.
Agreed. But now we do have to do the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Dracula, or Horror of Dracula. Stephen Nespella and Hobb both went with the BBC Dracula miniseries, which I have heard good things about. And Stephen Nespella also went with an Image comic called Dracula Motherfucker, which, yeah, great. Love that name. Eric Fuchs went with Stephen King's Salem's Lot, the novel, and also an episode of the Just King Things podcast episode on Salem's Lot. Mr. Milksteak had Halloween from 1978 and Shadow of the Vampire, the John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe movie, where it's the filming of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, but the actor playing Nosferatu is actually a vampire. And last but not least, Eric Johnson went with Vamp. I got to see that movie sometime. That's come around a lot. I got to check that out. So thank you, everybody, as always, for the listener shelf picks. Love having them every week. We are going to do our calls to action here, but please stick around for Currently Consuming, where Travis is going to update us on his Fast and Furious series watch, and I'm going to talk about the Garbage Pail Kids movie. So you got that to look forward to. But first, something that we're absolutely looking forward to talking about is we got a new review on the Apple Podcast Store. This is from user MXSandy12. He said, 5 stars, super informed and hilarious film podcast. Drew and Travis really know movies, and I love learning about the genre from them. From musical scores to scripts to the breakdown of the acts of the story, they give you a pro look at an incredible variety of awesome classic flicks. I'm hooked. Great banter, too. Thank you so much, MXSandy12. Oh, man, that made my day.
Yeah, they actually sent us a wonderful email as well about how much they enjoyed our Harry and the Hendersons episode. So, MXSandy12, a salute to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. You are a hero among heroes. And if you want to be a hero like MXSandy12, please go to the Apple Podcast Store and rate and review the show. It helps us out more than you can possibly imagine. If you do leave a written review, we will feature it here on the show. And as always, if you really like what we're doing here and you want more, you can go to patreon.com/GenreVision, where we post a bunch of bonus material, including a weekly pre-show. This week, our pre-show was about the Mortal Kombat trailer, and we actually ended up having a lot more to say than I thought we would about the Mortal Kombat trailer. So if you want to go check that out, it's just $5 a month, and you get access to all of the premium additional material we make for all of the GenreVision Network shows.
Speaking of patreon.com/GenreVision, we owe another shout out, and this goes out to patron and longtime listener Q Ross. We owe you a special thank you. We're so lucky to have you and folks like you who have been with us for the long haul. Without folks like you, GenreVision wouldn't be around. So an extra special thanks to you, Q Ross.
Let's do some Currently Consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
It's time for a segment within a segment. This segment is called Too Fast, Too Curious, and it's about what happens when one man who's never seen the Fast and the Furious movies gets a little too curious for his own good and decides to jump in. I've been talking about them 2 at a time, and I've been watching them in the quote-unquote chronological order, which means today it is time to talk about Fast and Furious 6 and The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. So let's talk about Fast and Furious 6. I think this is an absolutely fine, giant action blockbuster. I like that it is not a hugely globe-trotting adventure. It's mostly set in London. And I think it sticks close enough to its roots, the street racing stuff, that it keeps me happy. This has some important emotional beats that kind of, define where the series would go after this. This is the death of Gal Gadot's character. This has the death of another, fan favorite character that we thought we had seen in the next film that I'm going to talk about, Tokyo Drift. But this, as far as maintaining the kind of momentum that they managed to establish in Fast 5, it's like, yeah, this is fine. This is absolutely a fine way to spend like 2 hours at the cinema. I like that they're taking all these same characters further on their journeys. And like I said, it's a perfectly good giant blockbuster movie with a hilariously huge climax that takes place on a plane that's trying to take off on a runway that is way longer than any runway on Earth. And then I watched Tokyo Drift. And the reason I watched Tokyo Drift is because the post-credit sequence in Fast and the Furious 6 actually details something that happens to a character after the events of Fast and Furious 6. So, this is the chronological thing. We learn about what happens to Han and why Han ended up in Tokyo doing what he does in Tokyo Drift. And I really, really liked Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift.
From my memory of when I watched all of these, when the 8th one was coming out and I had to review it, 2 and 3 were the ones that stuck out the most for me.
Yeah, 3 is probably the best serious one of these. Obviously it still has its goofy things that it wants to do and has some comic relief, but it still has an actual dramatic argument at its center. And, actual character arcs and things characters go through, like drama and themes and metaphors.
It's about things.
Yeah.
It actually has stuff on its mind.
The opening sequence of the movie is actually really loaded with imagery and metaphor. There's this, character played by Lucas Black, who's this like, really thickly accented Southern teen in America, and he's going to high school. And, one of the first images we see of his day is he's going through a metal detector at high school. And then we see images of like the high school mascot, which I forget exactly what their mascot is, but their high school team has an upcoming game against another high school team called the Indians. And you see this really big banner that says "Kill the Indians." And it's like, whoa, this movie is actually talking about stuff.
It's pushing some buttons.
It's not doing it in a delicate way, but it's a blockbuster movie and it has to make those big haymaker swings. And then you see later on, like, the school mascot stomping out some like Indian shaped pinata. And it's like, okay, immediately we're made to feel like this is an ugly place and we don't belong here. And so our character, who's a juvenile delinquent, gets in a street race, and his mom is sick of dealing with him. So she ships him off to his dad, who lives in, where else? Tokyo, Japan.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he lives in Tokyo Drift.
Where else? Tokyo Drift.
Yes.
So yeah, that's where the story kicks off from there. And of course, this I think is a landmark film for Justin Lin, who was coming off a really interesting movie that got him a lot of buzz, a movie called Better Luck Tomorrow, that starred Sung Kang, the famous Korean American actor Sung Kang as Han. And, according to Justin Lin, that same character from Better Luck Tomorrow is in Tokyo Drift. We now know that the franchise nerds consider Better Luck Tomorrow as part of Han's origin story. What I love is this franchise is so doofy and so knowingly doofy that they're like, okay, you now have to accept that, despite Sung Kang looking like an adult person in his 30s and, possibly even 40s by the time Fast 6 rolled around, it's like now we have to see this baby-faced Sung Kang as somebody who is older and more grizzled. This is the timeline fuckery they pull with this, and it is such a silly joke, I think. And they do their best to like take it seriously, but it's like, all right, chronologically, Lucas Black, who doesn't even look like a high schooler in this movie, is now supposed to be a high schooler in his appearance in the next movie, Furious 7, in which he looks like his previous character. He looks like his character's dad now, basically. It's such a silly thing.
I mean, the term you're looking for is that he looks 40 as fuck.
Yeah, he looks very 40, which is not a bad thing. As a man in my mid-30s, I can say that that's not a bad thing.
No, but it's a matter of like, come on, like you guys, I mean, you doing this whole chronological order thing, I mean, to my OCD with film watching, it drives me crazy. But
what's the difference? What's it matter?
Because you knew this going in, so it wasn't. But the big surprise that Furious 6 is a prequel, Furious 6 is the prequel, and that Fast and the Furious 3 took place in the future.
Right.
Was such like an amazing.
Despite everybody using like big, ugly, chunky laptops and flip phones.
I know. It's
driving cars from like fucking 2003. It's insane. It's so funny.
Yeah. I mean, it is like, I totally vibe with that. But no, I remember 3 being, because I loved the second one. Like that was the one, because I'd seen the first one when it came out. I had it on DVD and was like, yeah, this is the thing that people like, but never got into it. And then never saw any of the sequels. And then when I decided to watch them all, I was like, yeah, 2 is my kind of big Dayglow stupid. And then 3 was like, this is the marriage between the first 2 movies that I think works the best. I
didn't really feel like 3 paid much attention to what 2 was doing. It seemed like, okay, yeah, this is something that is related and it shares some DNA, but it tonally is a very different beast. And I like that, it wasn't about like doofy, beachy himbos, like, driving their car off the end of the pier like it's the General Lee. You know what I mean? That's Too Fast, Too Furious. But this one is more like, how can we tell a story about this kid who, feels like a foreigner at home, but then goes to a foreign country and actually managed to find an identity that he likes, in himself. And they actually They actually kind of pull that off in Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. I was really surprised. And I like that, Justin Lin cast Lucas Black, who is not a Hollywood lead. You look at that kid and you're like, his teeth are imperfect. His bottom teeth are kind of, not like, somebody who has caps or, wore braces for umpteen years to get, Hollywood straight white teeth. He's got a really thick Southern accent. You're just like, this is that kid. And the fact that he's not some super glam star really makes that believable. And that, I think everybody else that they cast in that actually does a really great job of filling out the cast. The only thing I don't like about it is it doesn't really pay any good service to the female lead in the movie. These movies have never been great about the way they handle women, but
nope.
Yeah, the Fast and the Furious 3, I think is my favorite of the more straight-faced movies in this franchise. Whereas Too Fast, Too Furious remains my favorite stupid entry.
Fair enough. I mean, I think if I was going to revisit any of them, it would probably be 2 and 3. Those are the only ones that hold any water for me.
Yeah, they're the only 2 movies in the franchise so far that I would say are great.
Well, we look forward to the next update on Too Fast, Too Curious.
Yeah, it'll probably be my last one. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I will pass the baton to you. What's been on your plate?
Well, like I said, I watched the Garbage Pail Kids movie.
How'd that go for you? How'd that go?
Well, here's the thing. A little behind the scenes. We were talking about upcoming theme months, and I pitched the Garbage Pail Kids movie because it's a movie that Travis and I had both not seen. I'd never seen footage from it. I'd only seen still images. I just know this is a notoriously it's one of those quote worst movies ever type things. And I just got a morbid curiosity all of a sudden to be like, yeah, I want to check this out. I want to see what's going on here. And I had pitched it as an episode, and Travis used the very rare official GenreVision veto.
Yeah.
Of no, we will not watch that. And so I was like, okay, that's fair. I don't want to push for anything, but that itch stayed with me. And so I watched the Garbage Pail Kids movie. And I will say this about the Garbage Pail Kids movie. It has so many things in it that I will remember fondly. I can't believe I'm saying this. There is a vision to the Garbage Pail Kids movie. It's a deliberate, the whole premise of the trading cards are that they're ridiculously, over the top repugnant. And that's where this movie lives. In the first 10 minutes, it has a trash can spaceship, which never really gets explained. I guess they're aliens. There is a young boy who is taking his shirt off in front of a grown-ass man who owns an antique store, who just has a bathtub in the middle of the basement of his antique store.
Like you do.
He's also a magician, like a legit magician, not like a stage, like he actually can do real magic. And this kid who's bathing in front of all of these Garbage Pail Kid puppet monstrosities and a grown-ass man then changes into a dashiki. I can't even begin to parse that. But then there's just crazy stuff that I'm like, you can't do this in a movie. And that is always kind of exciting to me. Like there's a lot of plotting in here that's very typical, where it's like, okay, here's this kid and he feels down and out, and there's a group of older bullies that are picking on him, but they're picking on him to murder him. Like they take him down into the sewer because he's got a crush on the main bully's girlfriend, Tangerine.
Yeah.
So these bullies take this kid down into the sewer where there's these pipes that have different labels on them, like City Zoo, Primetime TV, and this is I guess sewage pipes. This would be what Travis calls joke adjacent. And then they open up a pipe and proceed to try and drown this kid in shit.
Hilarious.
I don't know if it's hilarious, but it's this aired in front of people's faces. Like this was allowed to happen and somebody okayed this. And there's something kind of wondrous about that. The Garbage Pail Kids themselves are absolute monstrosities. Granted, they're made by legendary makeup and effects artist John Carl Buechler, R.I.P. And he has a wonderful cameo in a painting where he's with a ghoulie, which made me very wistful. And the Garbage Pail Kids mostly look horrible, but there's weird stuff. There's an alligator one who's called Alligator, who is just all about trying to eat people's toes and is making a whole bunch of toe references throughout the movie and trying to bite people's toes. He eventually opens up a bloody lunchbox with severed eyes and fingers and toes in them. there is, I mean, here's the thing, like the actual repugnant nature of it is legitimately repugnant, like not necessarily in a fun way. But then there's stuff like the Garbage Pail Kids help Hero Kid get revenge by rocketing the main bully off of the toilet while he's taking a shit, so that just a torrent of shit water is propelling him up into the ceiling.
That happens in Fast Five. Fast Five and Garbage Pail Kids are the same movie. Thank you. This is my thesis. I will take no further questions at this time.
But I mean, there's literally a scene where the other two bullies, a couple, are sitting in a jacuzzi, and the jacuzzi they turn the little pipe in the sewer so that shit fills up in the jacuzzi tub, and the woman in the tub is like, brown water, and I'm like, my God. And there's weird stuff where it does plotting wise, where Hero Kid and Tangerine do not get together. It turns out Tangerine is a terrible person who is taking advantage of the Garbage Pail Kid's ability to make clothes for the fashion line that she wants to launch.
Oh, so like the Garbage Pail Kids are all like experienced seamsters. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a thing. And they, of course, have a song while they do all this sweatshop work. But she believes that they're very ugly and horrific and, makes fun of them. And the kid, there's like this really bizarre attempt at poignancy at the end where she's like, no, come on. Like, I still like you and stuff like that. 'Cause she wants to utilize their sweatshop abilities or something. And he says, no, I don't think you're pretty anymore. Like, and it's like, whoa, what the fuck? Like the movie, it's singular. I have to give it that. Like, it's a singular movie that I don't think it's as bad as like a lot of these kind of movies, when people are like, The Room is the worst movie ever made. It's like, I got to watch some more amateur movies.
If that's the worst movie you've ever seen, you ain't seen shit, baby.
You're lucky.
But baby, you just ain't seen nothing yet.
I can't hate the Garbage Pail Kids movie. I don't foresee myself ever watching it again, but I
will, because you're a Garbage Pail Kid.
Maybe
you're a little Garbage Pail Kid.
If here's the thing: if I saw it when I was 7, probably, like, it would probably be one of these, like, yeah, this is weird and bad, but it pushes a particular button. Now, I would definitely need a good impetus to want to revisit it in total, because there are moments from this I'm like, you should see this. Just watch this. Like, watch what's happening.
I would need the Clockwork Orange chair to watch that movie.
So you all missed out on a Garbage Pail Kids episode, but I did my best to tell you my take on it. So, but we will wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And our comment of the week comes from Mr. Milksteak, who said, I'm really enjoying this month's theme, as it's taking me back to my early years of reading Famous Monsters magazine and being exposed to so many of these iconic images. One of my earliest horror movie memories is the time a 9-year-old little Mr. Milksteak stayed up past midnight to watch Werewolf of London on TV. Never seen Werewolf of London.
Me neither.
That movie, along with Trilogy of Terror, were my gateways to this genre that I love so much, and being able to either revisit or experience these films for the first time is like being propped up in front of the television while everyone else is asleep. That definitely warms my heart in terms of what we're trying to do here at GenreVision. We're all trying to stay up in front of the TV together, is kind of the way I look at it. I really like that kind of vibe that we've cultivated here. And I'm very glad that you're enjoying the theme month. So thank you so much, Mr. Milksteak. And we will be concluding Hammer My Heart month next week with a collaboration between Hammer and the Shaw Brothers. This is The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. We'll see how that leaves us on Hammer My Heart month, but we look forward to it, and we look forward to having you here next week with us to check it out. So, as always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Dietsch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.